So it begins. Hello, everyone. The title of today's episode is Emotional Personification of an Impersonal World. The reason this idea has emerged in my attention is because I've wondered about what the human being desires to see and how much of its desire to see influences actually what it sees. I don't. Some terms perhaps must be cleared out. You see, the human being desires to see. When we get bored, we want to see more out of the world that we find ourselves currently in. Personification means that imbuing the personality, imbuing some phenomenology with a personality. Whether it is you suddenly see your teddy bear as alive, and when you're a little tiny kid, like imagine you see your teddy bear, you see the child sees the teddy bear, it's like, oh my god, this teddy bear is my best friend. In the mind of the child, that inanimate object is animated. And so it has been personified, it has been made into a relatable personality. Now, the reason I say emotional personification of an impersonal world is because emotions direct sight irrationally. And when I say irrationally, that means the species needs to consider the difference between emotionally inspired action and non-emotional action. That means if we were like a computer, there were literally no data from other memories influencing us. We were just a present mechanism, a present process. Like how would I say? Our emotions give us access to the potentials of sight. I remember sitting in a moment beside a fountain. Some of the most profound moments I've had in my life have been in public, where I've sat beside a fountain in a park. And I remember sitting beside that fountain and wondering about the nature of reality and constantly seeing the continuity of the water in the fountain, you know, being pumped and unpumped. So what I'm trying to say is that sometimes when we try to look at things, try to handle certain situations, our emotions get in the way. Our emotions are sort of valuing what this current reference point has and what other reference points. I'll give you a very interesting example. There's a show which the writing in this Japanese show called Attack on Titan. It was incredible. Like literally, there were characters in this show that kind of inspired me in so many ways. But anyways, there's a scene where they have to choose between two people who are both valued. The person has like this unique syringe that's going to make the person be alive. And so what happens is the situation is it's like one person has one commander, like some person in charge has to choose which person to bring back to life. One person is the general, is the commander of all their forces. The other is this smart kid who, without his intelligence, the commander couldn't get that far. So they have to make a choice, right? And the person who has the syringe, the man in charge, his name's Levi, he has to make a choice, and he chooses Erwin. He chooses, at first he thinks there's nobody left alive, so he wants to bring Armin. Armin is the, oh man, I should probably explain it. So what happens is, the main commander doesn't come back to life, because when this guy who decides to bring the commander back to life does it, the commander automatically lifts up his hand. And there's a sentence there where it's as if this captain chooses that kid. The reason he chooses it is because like there's a human extinction situation there, and he's like, I don't want to bring Erwin, that commander, back into hell, right? So there's a sort of notion of there's an emotional justification for his decision of who he brings back alive, based on the implication of various moments. So what I'm trying to say is that in our like, let's totally move away from that story now. And what I'm trying to say is that emotions influence us. If you ask the Buddhic, if you want to look from the Buddhic context, the Buddhic lens at what emotions are thoughts that have stuck too around too long and have become unpleasant. To continue, there is first a moment of sight where something is being. This is called your presence. How you are an existential phenomena is your presence as a being. Now, how this presence is here, based on how it moves, based on what intentions pull it or push it, the person begins to personify, not personify, to individualize. It's as if like the world is sculpting the person based on their decisions. We can't say it's only the person who chooses who they are, because the environments the person finds themselves are not in its free will, as if free will is not ultimate free will. It's just free will in a sort of given condition, given existential condition. Free will has to do with the experience's freedom and ownership of reality. you know and if that experience is given an individual position, if you feel you're just one thing, then you will live on that way. It's as if that's the room you have chosen to walk in. What emotional personification of an impersonal world suggests is that there are no personalities in the world. Because the person is a personality, because the person has a sort of story to them, they allow all phenomena to enter that story in order to become their life. Our attention is a very important factor that many children are not even taught how to use their attention. The child daydreams in class, the teacher slams the ruler to the table and says, "Hey, Timmy, hey Timmy, stop daydreaming, pay attention," And that kid, rather than the teacher being like, "Oh my God, this kid is having a daydream," and asking the kid to go sit in a corner and write down what his daydream was for himself, for the kid, we only value thoughts that matter. And as I say that, there's a pun intended as well. We only care for what is visible. We don't care for what is invisible because of two reasons. Because one, because we cannot see it. You cannot care for something you don't know. If a fellow family member is going through a hardship and you don't know, you cannot help them. So one angle is ignorance, And the other angle is you can't know. It doesn't matter whether you're ignorant or not, just the way the design of the dimension is it has limitations. It's not just people who are limited, you know, based on the person being limited, the world is also has its limitations of manifesting into an intelligence. So what that means is the human being is like a certain battery size, and this battery size is giving a certain amount of energetic reception of what's going on here. But the thing is, what is beyond us, it is unfathomable, kind of like a caterpillar trying to be a butterfly while it's a caterpillar. It can choose to open its wings, but there are no wings. Do you see? Sometimes Plato says time is the moving image of eternity, and sometimes you have to be patient. Sometimes time has to make its chess move first, and then you have to make your move. This life is not always about 24/7 being in control of everything. That's impossible. It's as if you tell me who is working hard when they're deep asleep, not even in a dream state. So you see, we are creatures that our attention shifts into various modes of itself. Our attention kind of its focal point, it localizes itself into a physical individuality and then builds a subjective realm around the subjective realm. But the true nature of the being is neither subjective or objective. So we try to, in some sense, when I look at religion, when I look at all the gods, when I look at the supernatural, when I look at how Carl Jung spoke about the unconscious and how unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will dictate your life and you will call it fate. Like the reason Carl Jung said that, I see there is an unknown vastness to this world. This unknown vastness implies that you cannot own it. If I ask you, what do you have? You see, you have two sorts of ownership. What is immediately there that you have, and what it is that you own. You know, it's as if like you have your phone in your hand. Okay, you have it. You see, and then there is a sense of what you own. You have a phone. You know, and what I'm trying to say is that we have the attempt of evolution. In some sense, evolution was a way of one creature trying to comprehend the whole world as just one creature. For example, I'll give you a sense of a very profound personification found by the poet in the imagery of the poetry of Jalaluddin Maulana Rumi, the Sufi mystic from Persia. He has a very nice quote. He says, I don't remember the exact poem, but I'll tell you the imagery. He says there's this moth flying around this candle endless nights, until one night the wings of the moth burn by the flame of the candle. And suddenly, the way Rumi opens this up is that it makes the moth and the moth and the candle be like lovers, be like a couple. You know, and so he pretty much personifies, he gives them personalities. And what happens is that the moment the moth, who is in love with the candle flame, and the candle flame who's in love with the moth, the moment the moth burns, the wings of the moth burn, the moth says, for so many nights, I have flown around you to keep you company, so in that cold world you're not alone, candle flame. You know, it's like the lovers fall and the last thing. And so the moth says, I've been around you to keep you warm. And then the candle looks around to the moth and he says, how could you feel I would burn you? I have been burning bright all this whole time to try to keep you warm. So it's as if from both realities, from the reality of the moth, he was living for the candle. For the reality of the candle was living for the moth. Eventually, regardless of how reality occurred in regards to the wing of the moth burning, it was in that sense, it's kind of like lovers are lost in their own worlds endlessly trying to find each other in one moment. So the same way that Rumi saw personality in a moth and a candle, as if they're lovers, intimate lovers. So similarly, we are really animating the intelligence of this life. That means the true intelligence of this world, believe it or not, is attributeless. You literally can't have an opinion on it because one angle does not define the point. All the angles define the point. And based on the added dimensions, the angles shift. We are just like how the attention of the moment aligns itself to a sort of personhood. The whole world wants to be perceived through that filter, which means man's greatest challenge is not his physical existence, it is the loneliness of the meaninglessness of his life. So you see what is really deciding people's level of acceptance of the world and non-acceptance is in some sense how much of the world is accessible to them. The thing about TV is that it began putting a lot of thoughts into the person's mind. That means that before, the person would just be in wherever part of the world they are and just look at the environment and just go about living their day. But the moment media kind of entered the scene of the anyways, to continue, the moment media entered the situation, it was as if the person had access to how other ways of human life were. And so what it is the internet is actually kind of an integration of the individual mindset in a collective atmosphere. You see, the thing is, society was a world in a world. We don't realize this. That's why we don't care for society. That's why most people are hedonist kind of trying to live solo lives of just whatever. Okay, I get what I want from this world, and then it's over. It has no meaning. Because we feel life has no meaning, we have forgotten that we must create the meaning. So we don't have responsibility as a sort of creator of the world. And the thing is, civilization is man's world. It is the world created for man by man. But nature is the world that is created for man, not by man. Do you see? And I'm not saying some supernatural creator, some sky daddy, I'm saying it's like it's one of those things where you don't you the concept or the idea of God is so sacred for you that you realize you cannot define. Religion is a sort of coming into contentment with the unknown and the attributeless and the undefinable, because the truth is beyond. I'm sure I haven't read anything, like I haven't heard Carl Jung say this, but I'm sure personally that Carl Jung probably had moments where in his development of the notion of the conscious mind and the unconscious mind and the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious, I'm pretty sure he had a moment where he was like, what if my eyes have opened up to the picture in the wrong way? Doubt is healthy. Too much doubt is unhealthy. I think there's a sort of health to the mind which has to do with the intensity you live. You live life. If you choose to live life too intensely, most likely you're inspired by some belief system, so you expect the world to happen as you want it. Whenever you expect the world to happen as you want it, it's kind of like, imagine you've been invited to a very, kind of posh gathering, and then you go in there acting as if you are the host. Do you know the host is standing there, like the person's house you're in is there, but you're acting as if it is your own house? You see, it's as if there will be a karmic consequence, because it's as if you're in a room not acknowledging the life that's there. Sometimes karma is like life tapping you on the shoulder and being like, hey, what are you doing? I just, there's been some moments I wish I had, like, literally my future self tap me on the shoulder and be like, hey, don't do that. You know? But in some sense, you cannot regret nature. It just happens. On some level, regardless of what human being is alive, it's just nature is dancing and we're here to enjoy the show. For me, this life does not conclude into a story, but for most people it does, and that's why, whether they like it or not, a belief will find them soon if they believe anything. So this doesn't mean that the whole world shouldn't believe anything. It just means that there is a new command and urgency for the human being to align its intelligence to itself. And what that means is, it's per se, it's not that your belief is wrong. It's just that how you have compartmentalized the data to have meaning could be of error. So in some sense, there could be a hollowness to this linguistic simulation that is trying to be the core of meaning. Okay, because I'll tell you something hilarious I notice about philosophy. I'm a person who holds the field of philosophy in a very high light. I feel it is kind of like the outcome of history. It's like that was the point of evolution, to have a part of the world wonder why it's being the world. So I'm telling you that, if imagine yourself right now in this moment, whoever you are listening, imagine, not imagine, just pay attention to how you're being something right now. Like, look at your physical body, you know? There's something here. This is your body. The first thing that I find the pilot of consciousness does, the pilot of consciousness is a very important concept I've developed, you know? And what it means is you are a moment that navigates as attention. So I am telling you, the fabric of the true core of your being is attention. is attributeless attention. Our minds are the result of a field of intelligence, which means that on some very hilarious level, we all think we are alone, but our minds can never be alone. The notion of the mind is the suggestion of the cause and effect response to data. That means it's like there's something here, this thing that's here looks at what's here, then chooses to do something about what's here. So pretty much the meaning of life is being generated in the furnace of an observer of data. That means it's all coming from observance. This observance, I've sometimes spoken about it, the observer within, or the witness within. The suggestion is to how the texture of intelligence is like what moves the moment is not material, but what is moving in the moment is. It has, So here's the great challenge of the next generations, all the children who will hear my talk, hear this. See, this is the next challenge. What is the level of engagement we want with? We want to what intensity should human beings live for the world they see? That means you are a human being. You're alive. Regardless of how you look like, what you look like, doesn't matter. It's all atoms at the end, till the end, And so this vast cosmos that we find ourselves in is a place where we don't only just draw artwork, we can draw ourselves into ideological existence. It's as if you can evoke mythology playfully. I do it in these talks often, In one talk, I remember I just... what I said made me laugh so much I had to pause the talk for a second. It's as if I said it's as if Thor's hammer fell, and before Thor could come down, somebody threw the hammer back, and Thor was like, "What the fuck? Who is worthy enough to throw Thor's hammer back to Thor?" And so mythology has to do with the subconscious value of life. Metaphors. The reason I find it's called metaphors. They are a sort of invisible reflection of matter, of the true circumstance of matter. You go see in the Zen tradition, their approach to the truth of truths was, in some sense, you gotta liberate yourself. And some people were like, "Whoa, what do I have to liberate myself from?" And they were like, "Liberate yourself from the whole world." And the guy was like, "Whoa, you want me to liberate myself from the whole world? But how's that possible?" And then the Zen master was like, "Exactly. That's the table where we want to ask the questions from." There's this really nice story. The story is, there's this enlightened yogini, and yogini is this an enlightened woman, an enlightened yoga practitioner. But the notion of yoga, the word means union. When you go look at Islam, the word, for example, means submission. When you go look at yoga, it means union. In one manner, the Islamic context is submitting to truth. That means the person is giving up everything to follow the law of revelation. And in another manner, oh my God. The other is integrating with truth. One is surrendering to truth, like submitting to truth. The other is integrating with truth. And the secular societies of the world, of course, they don't believe there is a truth out there like that. They are in a sort of acceptance of material circumstance. The whole mystical and religious mindset is that the person has seen the world to be a chaotic place and wants to get out of it. in both situations. There is no mystical tradition that does not entertain some sort of illusion to the world. That's the notion of a mystic, by the way. The mystic is a lover of the unknown. So if we say that there's like 50% of your moment is known and 50% of your moment is unknown, when the levels of the unknown in your moment go beyond 50%, when they go towards 100%, that's when the yogic mind begins to develop. The yogic mind has to do with the momentum of the lifetime through a sort of intuitive push, as if you are wondering what winds have evolved you to this point. So the world suddenly is seen to be unknown, as if the truth of the matter is unknown, like the roots of the tree of knowledge are in an invisible soil. And for me, that's the chaotic thing. That's the chaotic thing, that we think there's only this one dimension, but the polar opposite of the way we're existing now, which is another dimension. The yogi was the lover of the unknown. And as the story goes, there's this really enlightened, liberated yogini who's walking in this river. And as she is walking in this river, this incredibly enlightened woman, and she's walking in the river and she sees a very beautiful ruby. She takes the ruby, you know, and she just picks up this giant ruby and she's like, it looks beautiful, I'll take it. And she holds it in her hand and she's just walking in this very kind of gentle river. And as she's walking, she suddenly comes to a point where it's near town and there's a guy who's went and bought bread and is taking bread home. And he suddenly sees this lady in the river, in that part of the river that was near the road. Suddenly he sees this lady with a giant ruby in her hand, like something of enormous, let's say, financial value. And so this man, as if he gets possessed by his desire in that moment, he walks up to the lady and he's not being like a thug or anything. He says, please give me. Please give me. The guy says, please give me. Sorry, guys, my attention drifted elsewhere. The guy comes to the lady and says, give me that ruby, please, as if he's saying it like a command, as if he's like, I don't want to rob you, but just give me that, you know? The lady looks at the guy and instantly, it's just a rock. She's like, okay, here, take this rock, young man. And she gives the ruby to him, and she knows it's a ruby at the same time. She's not, you know, oblivious. But so what happens is she gives him the ruby, and the guy takes the ruby as if his desire instantaneously has been met, and it's like he gets an adrenaline rush, and he just shoves the kind of like coils the bread around this ruby to hide it and runs home. And as he runs as fast as he can home, he goes in, locks the door, sits at the table, and puts the ruby in the smushed up bread, like on the table. He takes the ruby out of the smushed up bread. He was using the bread as some sort of camouflage for the ruby, you know, and when he was walking. And so what happens is that the guy wonders about the treasure he has attained, and suddenly he gets a realization and gets shocked, and this is the moral of the story. That guy looking at that ruby suddenly wonders, what kind of treasure did that woman, enlightened woman, have that she could give something of this value away in an instant. Suddenly the ruby that was his lottery ticket became meaningless. It became meaningless because the strength of character and the inner dimensions of the human being became of a question. And believe it or not, I believe many billionaires are there in that state of mind. They're in that state of mind where they're looking at the ruby on the table. They're looking at the paradise they built and the desires they fulfilled, and now are wondering what next. And that what next is an incredible moment. It's kind of a moment where the liberation in Zen kind of applies to it. Because all these things I'm saying relate to the desires of sight. It's like we're a moment of sight that, because of its urge towards expansion, endlessly wants to see. So we are creatures that the entertainment industry will forever become a part of our lives. The way technology is being shared is because we feel life is so boring. Like, what else is there aside from like advanced technology, you know? So we suddenly, it's as if, how can I tell you, we have forgotten nature too soon, like a son who never got to talk to their parents enough, to his parents enough. It's like, I'm gonna make a playful story here before I continue. I'm gonna share this story. This story is something I have generated, but I feel it applies. So what happens is, a guy, he dies and he goes and he finds himself in a moment of judgment in the Abrahamic style, religious style. He finds himself in his afterlife in a moment of judgment. And then a divine voice, as if the voice of God, you know, or its intermediary, the voice of God and its angel or something. In that moment, the person, a voice asks this man and says, you have sinned. You will not go. The voice doesn't ask. The voice says, you have sinned. Your judgment will be harsh, and you will be condemned to like, you know, the fields of hell. And then the man says, no, I won't. And the angel says, what do you mean, no, you won't? You are. You know, it's like the guy's judgment day. And the guy looks at the voice of God and says, God, I have done nothing wrong, because I could never do anything wrong. I was your creation. And so in that moment, the angel of death has to call the top offices and be like, yo, this man says he can't go to hell because he was your design, God. So what do I tell him? And in that moment, God tells him he has found his own heaven. A way of standing beyond the firm conditions of life to study the unconditional true intelligence of the moment. That is value. That's when you learn from your mind. When you learn how the values of life emerge, they can't be always given. The child is raised in this world in a way where it's dependent. It's dependent on the parents. It's dependent. Its life centers around the spoon that is feeding it, you know? And that spoon is not just being given by the parents, it's also being given by society and all the various ideological belief structures. As if the child opens its eyes, and the family and the house the young child is being raised in, that house is like the world of the child. The people around it are the world of the child. Right? The first data, the first waves of data that are hitting the world of the child, in which it's in youth where hatred and love for the world develops. If the world is kind to you, if you have a graceful experience of this existence at a young age, your hope can never leave your eyes. But if you have had a cruel, let's say some children are found, some beings, I will not say children, I will say some beings open their eyes in difficult circumstances. Now that difficulty can define them, or they can see the opposite. It's as if it's like, there's a quote by Rabindranath Tagore where he says, faith is the bird that feels the sun even when it's dark, when it's the in the darkest hour. And what he means is like literally imagine a bird flying right before it becomes dawn, you know? Like before the sun truly comes out, or as even the light of the sky changes. In that darkness, pitch black darkness, the bird is flying, but suddenly its wings feel the waves of the sunbeams hitting it. So for me, it's all a playful dance of phenomena which can be articulated, literally creatively structured in any way. The fascinating thing is that existence is a program, but experience for the first time after 4 billion years of evolution is now also able to program in certain things into this program of nature. We are the part of nature that can move itself. And it can move itself not only in an objective way, but in a very sophisticated subjective way, which has led to the inner technology of language. You know, we have not just been designers externally, we have been designers internally. And sometimes it was the design of the inner reality that implied how the external reality functions. That means when you're in a situation, imagine you're a warrior in the middle of a war. Imagine like in the war where back in the day where people fought with swords. Imagine, prior even to the medieval era. And so we see in that moment, the warrior is in the battlefield, and in that moment where they're fighting, the warrior sees it has to use its imagination, and it has to be able to see how the external world, it has to be able to know how the enemy moves in order to be victorious. So you see, it's as if imagination is moving what is real to the person based on how the attention directs itself in the moment. I'm pretty sure if there was, let's say, playfully an extraterrestrial being that came down and asked some random human, hey, what's this world like? The human being would be like, I don't know what to tell you, man. It's like everybody sees something different, but yet we're all trying to be in it at the same time. It's not just people who reside in this material universe. There are subjective worlds that also are living among us. For me, it's as if a programmer needs to learn code, and by learning code, by learning that language, they get access to how the subjective activity has meaning. Okay, so it's one of those things where now the programmer is wondering the codes that have written it into meaning. And I early on somehow uniquely stepped beyond the language threshold. What that means is the reason in many moments I have not gotten angry, or in many moments where there has not been a chaotic karmic outcome, is simply because the words and the communications and the thoughts that were moving people's behavior in that moment, I in some sense saw their hollowness. As if somebody would come and insult me, and I would be like, this was, for example, in high school, I had this sort of experience. A person came and insulted me out of nowhere, and I would not respond. The reason is because that person didn't know who they were talking to. How could their comment have any substance? It's as if the same words can be said by an enemy or a friend, but how do you trust the words? The friend knows you, the enemy doesn't. The enemy just doesn't like a version of you their mind has conceived. And you are the same way if you have enemies. This is why it was like Gandhi was very next level. His karma was very unique, because every day he said it's like I'm born, like every day he wakes up, he's like a new being, and every day he sleeps, it's as if that new self dies. And every day he was a new self and new allowance for the whole moment's reanimation of meaning and structure. So it's as if like life is now come to a very playful situation in 2019, where the human being, believe it or not, the winds of evolution have taken us so far that we we in our study, in our search to see who we are, we have opened up a subjective multidimensional landscape, and internal. It's like imagination is a design in an invisible room. Right now I can imagine, let's say, in front of me in the air, hovering like an ancient golden kind of Native American canoe or something. You know, I could imagine that. My mind could imagine that object, yet that imagined object does not exist in the physical reality. It doesn't exist in the physical location I'm seeing. So the object's existence has an inner source. And because the object's existence has an inner source, suddenly you begin to see the mind, some people have said, is the greatest weapon. But I will tell you, sometimes you got to learn to wield this weapon and sheath it. You got to sheath your mind from the endless bombardment of various data that just hits you throughout the day. Not everything requires engagement, yet some matters do. And the most important thing that requires engagement, I find that the human being, its health is not just related to its physiology. It's not related to just what it eats or what it takes or what it does or where it goes. It's not just related to the physical dimension of it. It is also related to the story the human being tells itself, and how much life has been truly witnessed, the values of life have been truly witnessed in the story you're telling yourself. So some people are like, any person who feels their karma is strange, I will tell you this. You just have to sit down and ask yourself who you are in a way where you've never asked before. You have to, believe it or not, throw the eyes of ignorance away, and then you will find the eyes of clarity. You have to get rid of the illusion you have accepted to be yourself. Because sometimes strength doesn't have to do with how much like power, energy the person has. It has to do with how far the vision can see. So as if you're a moment of energy, and it can choose to externally direct this energy or internally. If you choose to internally direct it, it doesn't mean it becomes like you suddenly lifting like doing a deadlift of a very high weight, like double your weight, you know, doing a deadlift of double your weight. It's not an external surge of directed movement and animation. It's kind of like an inner resolution. Behind your eyes, you are looking at the world like a sky. In front of your eyes, you are something, an object looking at your sky. So the inner reality will come to the person as a sort of spacious witnessing, as if space is witnessing what's in the space. That's how your true presence is found in the depth of this phenomena we call the mind. So I consider language a technology that we have to use, yet this technology is something that if we think we are the technology, literally if you go inside a car and suddenly forget that you are not separate from the car, forget that you're separate from the car, like you feel that you are the car. So when you get in a car crash, when the car gets crashed, like the bumper goes in, you feel pain too. And so what I'm trying to say is that we shouldn't think of the technology and the vehicle as us, or there will be confusion between a mechanical nature and a natural nature. Believe it or not, the way is every person on this planet is honest. Let me tell you why. Because they have access to a moment where they didn't need to be dishonest. It's a sort of natural state. How much are you coloring the data of your world? Marcus Aurelius, this, I believe, emperor of Rome, this man, this Caesar, he in some sense has this quote. He says, the soul is dyed with the colors of its thoughts. And the Yoga Patanjali Sutras tell us too that it's as if your consciousness, this soul you're trying to put into some ultimate story, this soul is like a glass orb. And this glass orb moves around various surfaces. And your karma The concept of karma relies on the movement of time, but behind your eyes, in the depth of the ocean of your intelligence, there is not a sort of time. There is no time. When you experience a moment without time, you are also experiencing a moment that can never be temporary, because it is only in the change that our definitions arise. So it's as if you can right now get the best, most expensive clothing, wear the most expensive stuff, and go stand outside. And it's a sunny day, imagine, and you're like, oh, everything's nice, but suddenly it rains. Okay? And so what that means is, regardless of how you have, or you hold your perfection, or you navigate your attention in a belief, that perfection, the world will change it. The environment changes if you don't, and if you change, then you have changed earlier than the environment. It wouldn't overwhelm you. This world is constantly surprising you. I very playfully see it as that every day the world is giving you a gift. Its gift is not like something wrapped in a box. Its gift is existential design. When you look at life as a designer, you're in paradise. As if some guy who has designer's writer's block, imagine. Designer's block. The person can't think of design. Suddenly it's like, oh my God, I'm in a world filled with designs. You see, when you pay attention to the design, the emotions go out of it. This is the easiest way of, in some sense, arriving to the pure state. So the world doesn't have attributes. No, I shouldn't say it like that. Okay, here, let me start like this. The Buddha. The Buddha says objective reality is empty. The nature of objective phenomena is emptiness. And his disciples were like, what do you mean, Buddha? And Buddha and Buddha was like, what that means is, if I put a cup of tea here in front of you, and this cup of tea is, let's say, warm tea. One of you may think it's cold tea, and the other may think it's iced tea. That means you two are seeing the same objective phenomena, yet you both have your own unique subjective positions of meaning on the objective phenomena. So the nature of the objective phenomena is empty, but the nature of the fullness of meaning has to arise with the mind's presence. So the Buddhist way of thought was a sort of very intelligent way of kind of wondering about the presence of the person without the toils of the personality, without the karma of the personhood. You see, your karma has to relate to individual being. The moment you move into a state where the individuality, all duality, is being witnessed in the presence of one moment, there is a sort of divine supernova that occurs. The egoic construct that has believed itself to be only in a certain way suddenly sees a crack in its armor. And for the first time, the warrior that is fighting the war they think they see suddenly realize the world could never be a thought. Zen Master Dogen says, to study Buddha's way, Buddha's path, you must study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to awaken to the nature of all things. And what Mr. Within will add is that that nature is stillness and silence. It is the space where your ideological constitution has originated. You can say the mind is the spirit of language. It is the animator of the symbols, as if free will has to do with an ability of a person not to just acknowledge particles moving in space, but recognize the way that particle appears to the person has a subjective meaning. It's as if thoughts, sometimes they come out of nowhere, sometimes they are in response to a sort of thing you're seeing. Because we have two brain hemispheres, we cannot avoid both sides of the coin. We cannot avoid the creative explanation of the universe, and we cannot avoid the analytical explanation of the universe. These are just two sides of the brain hemisphere. We have to interpret the greatest way to stop war of any sort, and I believe there's a language war going on all over the planet. People are fighting over what is the correct language, as if they're looking for the ring in Lord of the Rings to rule them all. Like it doesn't exist. The heaven that human beings can build realistically, the paradise they can build, has to do with their collective efficiency, and their collective efficiency has to do with how much they move beyond their individual selfishness. Because inevitably it's going towards an unselfish collectivity. It just has to do with how fast we can bring it about. So many philosophers, too many actually, have spoken about some force attracting manifestation, you know? In ancient religious contexts, it was a sort of ancient Greeks called it the logos. Native Americans called it, you can say, the spirit of nature, or their ancestors. Wisdom of the spirit of their ancestors. The yogis called it Krishna, Krishna's will, the will of the gods. In the Muslim faith, it was Allah's will. And because of this creative mindset, we're all on the same page. It's as if, like, what every human being had in common is that they were somewhere asking a question. And when the obsession of the mainstream for always having answers for things goes away, the era of true exploration begins. The transcendence of the entertainment sector, entertainment industry will change. The entertainment industry right now wants to just hold cheese in front of the rat. But I'm telling you, the entertainment industry, once it truly understands the significance of, in some sense, how would I say it? Like, once the entertainment industry understands the significance of the education industry, once we understand that it's all about what kind of data we're putting in front of people's eyes, we will care for the true data. And all ideologies, there are no exceptions, all ideologies have to decide on the state of the world before they can exist. All ideology. Every sentence written by any human being had to acknowledge a world, a sort of positioning. We cannot ignore what we are related to, but we can move beyond the relationships that we conceive. And pretty much I'm telling people, relax about life. Don't take it too seriously. Let me tell you why. Because 50% of it is known and 50% is unknown. Because there's unknown factors, you can choose to live a very perfect, precision, kind of structured, everything measured all the time, robotic life. But you're going to see sometimes life, you gotta wait for life to speak first and then move. Sometimes you can't have a plan all the time, or then you're a stupid leader. because you don't need a plan all the time. Sometimes you have to wait for the other opponent in the chessboard to make its move. You got to look at how life moves first before you define your movement, and sometimes you got to move first before life defines your movement. That's pretty much like the person got bored and left the room they had lived their whole life in. I find that the civilization will be pulled towards an unselfish collective sort of, not, I mean, automatically it is collective, but a sort of unselfish ethos. This ethos means the inspirations of groups. That means if you saw a group as a person, what is that group inspired by? What is every person in that group inspired by? And we have to find the common inspiration among all human beings. And for now, we do have values. That's why we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We're like these ways that human beings, these are the freedoms that all human beings should have. As if we have had great leaders. I'm not, the first tiger up this mountain. And so we see the advancement of civilization has been towards a freedom of the gracefulness and efficiency of the lifetime. Like Nikola Tesla, when he died, the president at the time, the American president at the time, I believe, came and said, not, I don't know if it was the American president, the president at the time, the president at the time came and said, this man was the most useful human being. And I remember hearing that sentence and tears running out from my eyes, and simply because I realized how many human beings, their life is being occupied with repetitive, mediocre tasks that have only value to themselves. Have we forgotten there is a civilization here? And people are just going about their lives living. Have we forgotten that we are in a war with the unknown? Even though the mystic is a lover of the unknown, what I'm saying, we are at a war with the unknown. Imagine right now an extraterrestrial species just attacked our planet, okay? I find that will have the same level of emergency if there was a sort of kind of a technology that became a titan set loose in civilization as well. I feel it will have the same urgency. And so what happens is that if there was an extraterrestrial species, evil in intent, let's say, similar to the movie Independence Day that attacked humanity, it's as if the point is all human beings will forget the human wars for a second. All human wars will stop because a war between species has begun, right? And in that moment, just having a human around when your whole species is in the threat of extinction is very important to have that spirit. So I am saying, let's just imagine in that moment, if our species was at war with an extraterrestrial species, it would be one of those moments where all human beings, all organizations, all entertainment, educational sector, whatever, all parts of society will be like, oh my God, we have to live honestly and clearly to, in some sense, fight the danger ahead. You see, so there will be an instantaneous world peace when the species is under attack by an extraterrestrial species. So now I want us to take that relationship of an extraterrestrial species attacking a fragmented humanity that instantly suddenly unifies. Now I want us to see that that alien is not an extraterrestrial species attacking us. It is the unknown circumstances of nature. And that's what we are at war with. And if we are fighting ourselves, we are not, in some sense, advancing the species. The civilization is kind of like a caterpillar where every human being, every member of the civilization is, in some sense, a leg of this caterpillar. Yet this caterpillar is going into a metamorphosis. This metamorphosis is in a kind of revolutionary movement of the individual mindset into the collective trust and the collective presence. As if the same way you trust your lover and your loved ones, the same way you will trust the presence of your whole species. You will realize you could never be alone, and even if you were alone, you have to walk towards where the eyes of the species is going. Because why else exist as a human being if you don't care for this humanity? Why? Why do you exist then? You see, it's easy. It's always easier to break something than build it. This is why it's always easier to see life has no meaning rather than actually building its meaning. Again, this show, Attack on Titan, which I'm fond of, there's a character named Erwin. And I got to tell you more about it if you've never seen the show. So it's pretty much this human extinction scenario where all humanity is kind of cornered into these walls, and outside of these walls, these giant human-looking kind of mindless kind of human-eating creatures are attacking. The giants are attacking the city, right? So there's a situation where there's this commander, which is like the last resistance of humanity, against these titans. They call these giants titans in the thing. That's why it's called Attack on Titan. And so the whole thing is this captain, this commander Erwin, he's in a moment where he's realizing he's going to die, and he's realizing all his troops and his men are going to die. And there is literally an army of titans, like, they can't do anything. They're trapped, you see? And so in that moment, this commander just I won't give away the whole episode, but this commander this is I thought this was one of the most incredible works of writing on TV I've ever seen. So anyways, what happens? Commander Erwin goes, and the men the soldiers who were new recruits, all of them realize there's no point. They're all gonna die, and they start breaking down. And so Commander Erwin is like in this last moment where he has to, in some sense, he's trying to use all the people that are left as a distraction. So this other dude goes and assassinates the enemy. Okay. And so he goes there and he says very strictly, like his tone and his intention is literally, he's like a commander, and he's like, listen, soldiers. I'm kind of like, paraphrasing in my own way, but I'm trying to get the main things. Commander Irving goes to these soldiers that are hopeless and are about to die, about how all of them, even including Commander Irving, is going to die. And Commander Irving goes and says, soldiers, this is your last operation. We have to fight. And one of the soldiers says, Commander Irving, like the person's paralyzed by fear, he says, Commander Irving, are we going to all die right now? And Commander Irvin very intensely says, yes. And it's just an intense moment. And the guy says, and so you're saying it's better to fight if we're going to die? It's better to fight rather than just run away? And Commander Irwin says, inevitably, because we're all going to die, like that was implied in the situation. Commander Irwin says, yes, you must fight, And there's that moment of shock where Commander Erwin sees the questions lingering in the minds of his men. And you know what he says? He says, the reason we must fight is because that is the rage of our free will against the cruelty of the world. That is the only way our lives have meaning, because we are moving ahead in this circumstance. And what happens is, he says advance, and it's one of the most intense scenes where the army charges. The army realizes it's an existential rage about going into non-existence, as if this force that is going to take you into non-existence is coming your way, and you rage. You rage against the dying of the light, as Dylan Thomas said in his poetry. And so that scene was very incredible. It was very incredible because it showed a level of existential acknowledgement that recalibrated all the personal stories of the being. We are in an existential condition. That's the importance. And we entertainment industry is forgetting that. It's creating like rooms for people to go run into, rather than the film, in some sense, reflecting upon the intelligence of the being. In some sense, it takes them away from the world that they have one lifetime to truly know. Yet the imagination has its own purpose too. Creativity has its own impulses. For a designer, this world is a miracle. For a designer, it's as if the evolution of the design is how the design animates and changes. And so our eyes do not only see changing designs, they are changing designs as well. I have tried to hold on to the past, but something is pulling, like the human being is moving. Life is happening in a certain way where you can't hold the past too long. It doesn't matter how much of a photographic memory you have, you just can't hold on to it. So what that means is life is not about the past, and it's not per se always about the future. It's about a sort of freedom. This freedom arises from true values, not artificial values. So you got to see how much of your sense of personhood is based on artificial values, things you want there to be, and things that you actually are. And that's when you, in some sense, it's as if you wake up in the morning and go wash your face, but it's not, you're not just washing your face, you're washing like your whole soul into a new mode of, into a new view, into a new way of walking as yourself. So we look at life, there's a person there, this person has emotions because it has considered values, and its mind looks at an objective phenomena, something that is impersonal, again, like the Buddha said, empty, and it personifies it. So when I see a person walking on the side of the street, in some like in a only limited to a scientific lens, we see it's like I'm just watching a bunch of atoms. It's like that's not like a some person, a citizen. That's a bunch of atoms. Sometimes you have to watch the stars from a distance. Sometimes a person's desires can want their sight to be in a way where it can't possibly be there yet. Once you become content with your presence, that means not only should you be okay with your physical existence, how you are as a physical being, but you should also be okay with this awareness, this light of a candle that's kind of like lighting up the whole room, lighting up your whole moment. Your mind is, to be honest, where all gods live. The material universe is just it's just a movement. It's a happening. It's as if mystical inquiry can say to begin when somebody wonders, what's holding this camera that is my eyes witnessing all phenomenology? And then, and then you truly realize the magnificence of what is hidden beneath us, behind our eyes. It is will. It is our free will's pure presence. I say attributeless because all ideology is trying to own. Ideas exist only in attention, so ideas are trying to own your attention. And it's not even the system. You can't blame it on society. You have to blame it on just how the world is designed. The world is designed to occupy attention. This is why you go and see in like schools, children are obsessed with the attention they get. A person's health nowadays, it does not depend on just like how their attention is also based on their attention they get, because the ideology, their sense of personhood is reliant on communication. This is why parents in all around the world should focus on allowing, giving the child wings of communication, being able to share inner reality easily with the outer reality, and not always all of the inner reality because it's impossible. It's as if, how can a speck of dust in a light beam understand the nature of the light beam? Time is very malleable. It has to do with your attention and your energy levels. Once the body is physically maintained and you have reached a sort of resolution and contentment, once you are okay with physical existence, then you can say more subtler levels of how your mind animates itself in every moment open up to you. Life then moves on from learning, trying to constantly gain instruction from books or texts, or it's as if you stop trying to learn from language only, and you just abide as the experiencer. Even at that point, there's no sense of within or without. I use the name Mr. Within because I want people to wonder about what's looking out, what's within them, from within them, looking out into the world. That's why I use the name Mr. Within. But the whole notion is that we have to see where it's going, and many technologies are being used. Silence and stillness is where the breath reminds not only the body but the mind of its natural origin. You cannot control nature, which means you are in a roller coaster ride, which at the same time means what you can control on this roller coaster ride is how you experience every moment. So it's as if, stop worrying about the story of your life and just live your life and see what happens. It's kind of like the honor of the samurai, which had to be able to acknowledge what is lost as much as what is gained. You see, most people, even if they wanted to be victorious, because they have been non-victorious for so long, in some sense, they feel subconsciously they don't deserve victory. As if a person who fails too many times, like every time, will eventually feel they don't deserve, right? And that sense of the feeling they don't deserve stops them from the ambition. And this is why how you interpret failure is important. On a very simple level, you can interpret it as feedback, but on a much more deeper level, it is, again, the darkest hour for the bird in the sky, where the sun's about to come. So it's at the edge of failure you find the world of success. So failure is a gift, but so many people throw away that gift. They're running away from that gift. Fear is a game that needs to be played as much as you need it. Anyways, guys, I feel I should end the talk here. Pretty much my whole approach is that, first of all, the sense of self shifts. Every year you blow the candle cake, you're kind of like a different, your biological existence is different, and also your subjective positioning of how the world has a value or is a value has changed also. You know, I believe that beliefs don't exist, and that's a very strange statement to say. Something I say is, be free before you could not be. There's this Rumi, this poet I mentioned earlier. He has this very interesting poetry poem where he says, I remembered exactly, he said, I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and rose to animal. I died as an animal and I was man. And then he says, why should I fear death? When was I less by dying? I shall die once more as man, to soar with angels blessed. But even from angelhood I must go on, to where no mind has ever conceived, which in some sense means the evolution of the consciousness is from the conceivable to the inconceivable. Your mind, its journey is towards non-existence. Your body, in some sense, it is a display, it is a performance. This is a very unique metaphor I can share, but imagine like you see in like those ocean documentaries where the whale is like kind of swimming and there's these smaller fish around it. This is a very strange metaphor I'm going to say right now, but I think it somehow can apply. The small fish is like the physical existence. The whale is the existence of the mind's kind of collective attributeless reality. And in some sense, somebody, the greatest way, like somebody, if I was to challenge my own position here, I would say, how can you give a sort of, how can you personalize everything? And you see, because you can't, the unknown becomes the God of the moment. So people, all ideology is either choosing to have an unknown origin or a known origin, and that's it. Ladies and gentlemen, you have learned everything in the linguistic simulation. Just look at how much the effect of something knows about its cause and how much it doesn't. The sense of intelligence, a true intelligence, is not the guy. I think the guy who wrote the IQ test had an incredibly low IQ. The reason I'm saying that is because intelligence has to do with response, not to response to certain, geometrical kind of puzzles that can be easily figured out, you know. But to some sense, a response to a living world in which this life's free will keeps the unknown alive. Your free will needs the unknown to define itself. That means this is why Voltaire was so wise. Voltaire, I find he was one of the most, he saw so deeply into the future that I feel Voltaire saw even beyond this moment that I'm living in 2019. I feel he saw beyond. Even though it's impossible, but I feel his imagination kind of tapped into it. And Voltaire says, even if the concept of God never existed, we would need it. Because eventually, in the evolutionary scheme, we reach a point where man had to, in order to keep his subjective sense of self alive, to give a sense of self to the world. And that's God. God is the sense of self of the world. So, but it is inspired out of our own eyes, the one who's looking at the reality. And because it's inspired out of the one who's looking at the reality, it's kind of like God created man and man created God. The unknown led to the known, and the known looked at the unknown and said it's an unknown personality, or personified it in some way. I feel it's all about a sort of maturity that arises through alertness of the actual living phenomena. Simple as that. That's where true intelligence is hidden, in what you, whether you like it or not, can't ignore. Your moment is not just the world, it is your mind. All those people looking for their mind, it's here, it's the whole moment. Bodhidharma, this Japanese patriarch, to the Japanese, and he in some sense finds himself meditating, by the side of this kind of castle wall. And one night, there's some really bewildered, troubled stranger comes to him. He's found out Bodhidharma is meditating there, and he comes and he waits so long, like he waits weeks, and he sees Bodhidharma is not stepping out of his samadhi. Bodhidharma is still in this kind of meditation. One night, he sees, one misty night, like there's fog and mist everywhere, he sees Bodhidharma suddenly wake up. Bodhidharma suddenly wakes up from his samadhi. And when he wakes up from his samadhi, this guy goes and runs to Bodhidharma and says, Bodhidharma, please, you gotta help me. Like as a desperate man would in that situation. And Bodhidharma, he doesn't acknowledge this man at first, as if his attention is not on the material, or like in the material completely. And so he goes there, and the guy cuts his hand as a sign of loyalty in some strange sense. I don't know, something weird I think they would do back in the day in the savage traditions. But anyways, the guy cuts his hand, puts it in his other hand, and looks at Bodhidharma in a strange way, and the guy does this savage, this chaotic thing in front of Bodhidharma, and says, Bodhidharma, I will be loyal to you to my whole lifetime, but please help me with this. My mind is restless. As if the guy had an issue with his mind that was worse than his physical condition of existence. So he didn't even care about his physical existence if he could do that, because he was so troubled by his mind. And Bodhidharma, eventually, the moment leads him to granting this guy an audience. And he says, what is it? The man looks at Bodhidharma, he says, I have not slept for days and I feel like I'm dying. And he says, I'm restless. My mind is restless. Please pacify my mind, Bodhidharma. That's the exact words he says. Please pacify my mind, this restless mind. Bodhidharma looks at him and gives him an incredible command. And he says, okay, I will pacify your mind, but bring your mind in front of me right now and put it right in front of me and I'll pacify it. And the guy who asked the question, the guy who had in some sense, had the problem, gets shocked. There's a moment of intense silence, and Bodhidharma is just kind of staring at this man in a way, whereas if he's the ever-presence of the moment. And the man looks at him and suddenly realizes. He freaks out. He starts shaking and he says, Bodhidharma, I can't find it. I can't find my mind. And Bodhidharma looks at him and says, there, your mind is pacified. And the man gets instant nirvana because he realizes his problems never existed. The problem of his mind never existed. The mind wasn't an object. It was a field of presence of intelligence. And the man, when he attains nirvana in that moment, he realizes, he finds the ultimate contentment, because you have, in some sense, cowered away from confronting the true nature of your being. You have been pushed to the corners of a lonely place to be drawn only out by beliefs that serve you. You have to get rid of the idea of self that doesn't help you and start again. We are artists of nature. We have always been. Language can define you, of course it can. But language can also, you can see beyond it. There's a magnificence to the world. You don't have to always be looking for something. You just kind of live and watch it play out. And there's a brilliance there. And the inner reality, eventually through the lifetime, as there's more laps ran around the sun, the person suddenly finds more acceptance of how life is happening. However, this acceptance there will be this kind of, I call this the mortal clock that suddenly starts ticking. And this mortal clock is the recognition of the value of the life of the person in accordance to how long they feel they will be alive and what they feel they can do in that time. And the strictness of, especially, I could say, modern cultures, Western culture specifically, it's as if it's become so hard to get where you want, where it's as if it doesn't make sense to attempt it. As if children are inspired to go to work, but they are going to work with incredible depth. So it's as if they are chained. It's as if, like, if you, it's as if the system, the social system, is shackling the child by the neck and pulling it towards the more and more of how the child will be defined by that system. And at the same time, the child is like, okay, you don't need to shackle my neck. Let me just see what's going on, and maybe I might help this. It's the freedom of space that we must now protect. The space where freedom can exist in. That the attention to nature. I personally believe, I'll say it like this, I've envisioned an evolutionary return to nature of the whole species. But this evolutionary return means we've reached this sort of edge, an edge where there can be no more evolution because the future's value is void. It's as if there's no point, so why try? That's like saying, like, you know, you're thirsty, there's no cups, why go check and see if there's cups or not? You know? You know? Life is always, at least if it needs to be communicated, must be contained. It must be encapsulated in some sort of conceptual, again, I'll say constitution. Again, ideological constitution, conceptual constitution, they are in the, like, very similar context. So I find that it's a transformation of meaning and how meaning is kept in life, and how much of it is in accordance to subjective data and how much of it is in accordance to objective data, and how much of it results or is resolved in some sense the abidance of presence. Abidance with the presence. That means it doesn't matter what kind of personality you have, just be aware of how you're being present, and your intelligence automatically updates. The unknown levels of your mind, once you're more content with the world, it's like a great sage once said, you can only do two things in life. You can either trust it or distrust it. If you distrust it, it's as if there's no point, like, you won't get anywhere. You don't trust it. It's as if anything happens, it means nothing to you. But if you trust life, that is when life's true beauty, I find, opens up to you. Its true meaning comes into motion, not with you just in a static way having a snapshot of what life means, but being involved in its dynamic evolution towards a sort of, it's like now the human free will has to choose to look, it has to look at nature, and then it has to choose how much it wants to have a relationship with the natural world, and it has to look at the unnatural and choose how much it wants to have a relationship with that technological reality. So it's as if we are this child of nature being torn apart between the technological and the natural. So it's a very, pretty much it's all a call of action to the new search for meaning in accordance to direct experience, not indirect ideology. Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. Whew.